Messy and Masterful. In this podcast, we speak about the success of people who have achieved, built, or done something amazing, special, remarkable, noteworthy, and/or fabulous. Think of presidents, doctors, chefs, architects, filmmakers, writers, philosophers, CEOs, journalists, and the list goes on and on of people who've had a genuine impact on this world. But rather than underlining their career victories, we speak about the challenges they needed to overcome to actually get there. In each episode, we discuss 3 of such challenges, obstacles, difficulties, and/or hurdles with our guest, putting the messy of their lives next to the masterful. A very warm welcome to you. My name is Alder Bab, and I'm so happy you could make it. So sit back, relax, and download the podcast here. Happy Thursday, everyone, and a very warm welcome to our very first audio Aficionado episode. Very excited about this. So, different to our messy and masterful interviews, these conversations are all about the power of audio and more particularly podcasting. What we're going to do is we're going to dive into podcast programs other than our own. And we're going to do this together with people who are doing something great in this world and also have been inspired by this mighty tool of the gods of audio called podcasting. Today, my guest is Drew Vernon, who is the creator of 2 podcasts himself. And I believe him to be an audio aficionado in the truest sense of the word. This undoubtedly loving husband and father of 3 kids is also a marketing director at a company called Tonies, which is an audio company that produces something called the Toniebox. And the Toniebox is an incredible device that has the power to generate any story your child wants to hear. Any fairy tale, any Disney story. You can also record your own stories. And what we're talking about is not only how this works as an individual story device, but also how you can apply it in schools and how teachers can work with it and how students can learn through it. Drew's a great guy, an inspiring podcaster, and just like us, a devotee to improving the state of education in this world. I could not have asked for a better guest to launch our very first audio aficionado interview with. So sincerely hope you will enjoy this interview with Drew Vernon.
This podcast is brought to you by Smartest, an app that uses artificial intelligence to let you create interactive quizzes for your class in a few seconds. Get started for free on app.smartest.io.
Yeah, and I'm so excited about this next interview because it is the first of its kind. As you might recall, we previously announced a new interview format, which is a format whereby we're going to talk to great people, great creative people who are doing very interesting things in the world of education or potentially outside of that. But the reason why they are a guest, other than the fact that they are great and amazing, is also that they are podcast lovers, that they like to listen to specific podcasts and in some cases even make podcasts themselves. And today I have someone with me that I think is very worthy of our time and attention because he is an audio aficionado. Like you can't have them more pure than this gentleman by the name of Drew Vernon. And Drew is the creator of 2 podcasts. One is called Childhood that he makes together with his lovely daughter. And I hope that we can talk about that in further detail. And he also creates Tony Time because he is working as a marketing director at Tonies. And Tonies, as some of you might know, is an audible tool. I always say it's like a storytelling box that you can use for little children. And it really takes children kind of into this magical world of the most beautiful stories that are there, in a safe way because it's all audible. So first of all, Drew, a very warm welcome to you. I'm so happy you could make it.
Thank you so much, Aldo. I appreciate the introduction. It's lovely to be here. Thanks for having me.
So let's first and foremost kind of clarify because I have officially baptized you as an audio aficionado. Would you say that's correct? Is that a correct kind of summary of who you are?
I haven't been described that way before, but I will totally embrace it just because of the space that I found myself in. I think audio is a fantastic medium and I'll take it. So thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, same here. I love the medium. I like the fact that you could really take your time in absorbing audio, and that because it's an audio tool, you don't necessarily need to stop doing other things. You can listen to it while you're at the gym, while you're during your commute, in the car and whatever, and still it's a pleasant thing to do. But if you want to, you can also just pause and at the end of the day just listen to it and only listen to it, right? So it's one that mixes very well with our busy daily lives without it being too intrusive. So that's my version on this. May I ask, when did you fall in love with the world that is audio? Is there a specific moment?
Well, I kind of came into audio through toy. So prior to my work at Tonies, I was working at Lego and having a lot of fun, working with preschool toys and then coming in over to Tonies, it's an audio-based toy. So that's kind of when I was introduced into the world of audio and began to embrace it.
That's interesting. So, for a toy company like Lego, what is their take on audio? Where do they see audio as being something important?
That's a great question. Lego is classically about tactile play and developing the builders of tomorrow. I can't say for certain how uh, deeply they're getting into audio. I think I've seen a couple of partnerships that they've done. I don't know if it's a primary focus for them as it is for Tony's.
Yeah. Yeah, because Tony's is safe to say only audio, right?
Well, I would say Tony's is about the kind of the combination of audio with tactile play because we do have the figurines. The navigation is done through tactile play, but it's also very audio focused as well.
Yeah. Well, I don't know, kind of, because I would like to bring it back because there's an overlap clearly in what you do professionally, but also what you do, as a father and, kind of the podcast you create. What gave you the idea? So the podcast I first would like to talk about, because I think it's a wonderful idea, is your podcast Childhood. What gave you the idea to start it?
Yeah, so I began working for Tony's in March of 2020, which happened to coincide with COVID and the lockdown of schools and businesses and everything like that. And I was working from my basement. Later that year in the fall, my daughter's preschool was shut down due to COVID. And so I was there working from home. My daughter was there, she was taking some Zoom calls for her preschool. And I thought, hey, what a great time I have right now. When she was 4 at the time, wouldn't it be great just to spend some time together? And so we actually just started having tea parties and we would record them and I would just have conversations with her. And I didn't exactly know what I wanted to make of the podcast at first. I just wanted to kind of capture that time with my daughter. And once we got 7 or 8 episodes in, I said, hey, this is a great opportunity, not just to spend time together, but to teach my daughter the creative process and to teach her the storytelling process. And so those are some of the themes that we focus on. We talk about storytelling, creativity, and really it's just an experience to share our childhoods together. So hers that she's currently having, and I'll tell stories from my former childhood. And it's really just time well spent together.
Yeah. Nice and recorded. Sorry, and my math is all over the place because you started November 2020 and we're now end of 22, of course. So your daughter's almost 6. Is that correct?
She is 6, yeah.
She's 6. Yeah, I said 5. So it's 6. She's 6 years old. So that's 2 years of recording. But that's gold because I have a 3-year-old daughter, and you see they're growing up so quickly. So also in where they are in terms of brain development, that's lightning years as they accelerate, right? It goes so fast. So I can imagine you already pick up on many differences recording now versus recording 2 years ago.
Yeah, so our conversations are becoming more sophisticated.
Yeah,
It helps that she's just, I call her a little ham because she's
yeah,
very bubbly, she's very spontaneous. I've trained her at this point to kind of follow the improv process, which is just kind of the model of yes and. So if I introduce an element to the story, she'll just take it and run with it. And I
Mm.
learn a lot from her just due to her outgoing personality.
What does she think of your childhood? How does she respond to it? Because I sometimes try that. Like my daughter asked me this morning in the car, like, who was your grandmother or your grandfather that are sadly no longer with us? And I try to explain, but I don't know. I don't know if it sticks. Like, do you have those moments that you're like, does she pick up on everything, or and how does she respond to when you speak about your childhood?
I think she finds it interesting. Obviously, a lot has changed since I was her age.
Yeah.
Over 30 years have gone by. So the world has changed quite a bit. Technology has changed quite a bit. I will tell her about, my favorite stuffed animal as a kid, or being into, collecting baseball cards, or the things that kids don't really do anymore. So it's fun to kind of notice the little differences generationally of what it's like to be a kid in the 80s versus the 2020s.
Any new revelations for you that when you listen to your kid, like, hey, I'm getting to know you differently when we record versus when the recording isn't on?
I think I'm just a little bit more focused on her and childhood as a whole. It's actually taught me quite a bit.
Mm.
So I have really found myself becoming an advocate of child development through this process, because I see the innocence and I see the willingness to learn that my
Yeah.
daughter has, and also in my other work for Tonies. I
Mm.
also, not to get onto a tangent, but back when I was living in Connecticut, I actually started a daycare as well. So just observing some of those experiences, seeing kids coming from different backgrounds, it made me really passionate about the topic of childhood development, and doing the
Mm.
best for teaching our kids and preparing them to become, happy, adjusted, functioning adults.
Mhm. There's this genuine love for childhood of your daughter, but just anyone's childhood. And then there's the personal perspective of you as a father. I'm sure that also drips into the podcast. So it sounds like a lovely thing, and I wish you all the best with it. Let's go to podcast before because you are the creator of another podcast, which is where you are affected professionally as marketing director at Tony's. Tony Time is one of the podcasts you make. But before we go to that, I'd like to talk about podcasts you would like to listen to. And that's also one thing we discuss with our audio aficionados, not only the podcast they make, but also the podcast they like to listen to. So you nominated Akimbo by Seth Godin as kind of the podcast you would like to talk about. Why that one?
I've been following him for probably 15 years. He was known, I think, before the podcast, was writing, a daily blog post. And, I've read, a dozen of his books as well, but he talks a lot about business and marketing, and really just the creative process as well. And so I really enjoy his take on all of those things. And so that's why I've nominated the podcast.
Great. Any things that you feel like that any episodes specifically you would like to single out? Has there been any moment that you're like, wow, I'm over inspired now, and I need to, while you rush into work in your car, you're listening to the podcast, like right away, I need to implement this. I might be over dramatizing, but has there ever been such a moment?
There have been quite a bit. And,
Oh, wow.
it's funny because I feel like he has such a common sense way of speaking that it's never like, oh my goodness, this guy is a genius. It's just like, oh, why didn't I think of that? Or he
Hmm.
just explains it so commonly and so well that it resonates with me. And one example of that is, he has this topic saying, is effort a myth? In the world of Instagram and people being famous for 15 minutes and the Kardashians and all of this, does it really make sense to really plug in day after day and to make an effort? And he outlines a very strong case to say, you can't go out and choose to be lucky. But you can choose to work hard, and through your daily practice. In fact, he's got a book called The Practice. That's how you can really build success. And it's something that you can choose, because it's not leaning on luck, which you
Yeah.
can't choose.
So it's almost how you respond to it and how you kind of set yourself up to, to become resilient, kind of in whatever it is you want to achieve.
Yeah, and just
Yeah,
chipping away at a
yeah,
goal, having a goal and making a daily contribution to that goal, and practicing and
yeah,
becoming an expert, and through dedication and hard work,
yeah,
you'll achieve the goal.
yeah. And do you see yourself putting the practice into practice now these days?
I do. Obviously, I'm not perfect, but that's partly inspired me to develop a morning routine, to wake up and to read first thing. I do my best not to check my phone until 8 o'clock in the morning, which is kind of hard to do when you're up for an hour or an hour and a half, not to check your phone. I try to do the same thing at night, by the way. After 8 p.m., I try not to check my phone. I'm not perfect at it, but just little things like that. I feel like the little steps that we take and the principles that you set for yourself are how you develop that practice and develop that skill.
Well, you can't see us, but I've been applauding Drew because I'm exactly on the same page with that, specifically when it comes to morning routine. I also try to read every morning and not look at my phone. And my trick to this is actually, so I have my wife and my daughter. They like to sleep in a little longer than I do. So I get up a little earlier, and that gives me time, first off, to go downstairs. And first, I don't know why I need to do it, but I need to do it. I clean the kitchen. So I clean kind of, whatever that needs to be cleaned. I prepare breakfast, take the breakfast upstairs, and then I have some time to read. And I just love it. And as exactly as you, I do not get anywhere near my phone. I also make sure I don't have my phone in the bedroom or anywhere upstairs, that it's downstairs, and that I just take some time to read. And it just ignites me a lot better in my day than if I just take my phone and just let my, whatever's in my phone take me away and let it make me anxious and stress me out. It just, I'm a lot better harnessed when I pick up that phone just a little later and giving myself some space to read, and it just really helps me. So I'm very much on the same level there. And yes, I think you're very right. It's really about how you set yourself up and what you kind of want for yourself, and also how you make it a daily habit, right? That's also James Clear, Atomic Habits. That's the other book I like to name drop.
Hmm.
While we're at it, is really that really gives you make it easy for yourself, make it something that you can repeat, put a little reward system for yourself in place. Don't make it overcomplicated. You don't need to read a book every morning, right? A few pages is already good, for instance,
Hmm.
when it comes about reading, but make it a routine, make it something you can always, do repetitively. And I think once you're onto that, that's really good. And ever since I've been doing it, I've been able to do it, and it just ignites me a lot better than before. And yeah, like you, I'm not perfect, but yeah, I'm a big fan of your approach. How do you do it in the evening? Because I just fall asleep with a book if I try to read in the evening.
We've got a little routine. So I've got three kids. We'll usually wrap up dinner and clean the kitchen, and then we'll settle down for usually a short, TV show or something like that. We'll put the kids to bed, and then we'll have kind of like our time. My wife and I, often we'll read or we'll watch a show, and then usually by 8 o'clock, I try to leave my phone upstairs charging on the nightstand, just so that I'm
Yeah,
not tempted to look at it. And,
yeah,
I can't remember particular studies, but I feel like I've seen studies that say, you should try to get off your phone at least an hour before bedtime.
yeah,
So that's what I try to do.
yeah. Definitely. Yeah, definitely. No, I mean, the screen time is, I think, is killing, and we shouldn't have too much of it. Just before this interview, I had an interview with a neuroscientist, and he's very much into how our brain further develops. And he said that unfortunately, loads of anxiety issues and loads of addiction issues, technology addiction issues, are going to come out of how we are now wired to our phone, how we're so into our phone and into those screens. And that concern is not necessarily for people like you and myself, Drew, who are a little older, if you would allow me to say that, but more for the next generation. That the way the brains of our children develop and the way they respond to screens, and the fact that they're introduced to screens a lot sooner than we were, and so frequently, and respond so differently, that that's going to have an impact into how their brain is growing. And then unfortunately that's going to make them a lot more susceptible to anxiety things, and kind of things like concentration, and that we need to be very mindful of that, on how we proceed with that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
I'm not a neuroscientist, but I agree with that. We
yeah,
live in an Instagram, TikTok world where everybody's trying to get clicks and likes, and we're showing
yeah,
the best parts of ourselves, the highlight reel, so to speak. And so you have these bits of content that are being created that are not only, showing only the best parts of life, which cause, anxiety and comparison, but it's also designed to be the snappiest and juiciest bits of content to capture attention. And so we're being
yeah,
trained literally to focus on 3, 5, 30-second clips.
yeah,
Well, how's that going to affect our ability to focus and how to
yeah,
maintain, a common train of thought? I
yeah,
think it's challenging in that kind of a social media world.
yeah, yeah, and yeah, no, 100%. And it worries me also, the dopamine release we get from a like or a notification, like just something coming up in your screen. There's a dopamine release there, and that's highly addictive, right? And if our brain is developed well enough that we're able to postpone our impulses, or not to give in to our impulses, then it's all nice and lovely. But that's what you're a child for. Children are less able to do that yet, because they're still so much in development on so many levels. So their impulses will, you know they won't be able to control their impulses when it comes to this dopamine release. So we should not make them subject to it, as much as we can. Anyways, yeah. So that's a big discussion, and I do worry as a father, kind of how I'm going to have my child be exposed to screens, and how she is already exposed to screens, and how we should deal with that as a concerned parent. We are proudly supported by Tonies, who have created a product that I absolutely love called Toniebox. It's an audible tool that allows the discovery of our world's most beautiful stories for children of all ages. We are the proud owner of a Toniebox, and our 3-year-old daughter listens to the Tony stories religiously, whether this is the Gruffalo, Cookie Monster, or her all-time favorite Elsa from Frozen. Loads of figurines that fit on the box, and loads who are dying to tell you their story. Now, what I particularly love about the Toniebox is that there is no screen involved. So you can basically use the box at any moment of the day, just before bedtime or as we do during bath time. Now, Tonies is also making tremendous strides improving their product for teachers from all over the world so they can grow their lessons. And if you want to know more about what Tonies is doing, you can go to us.tonies.com/pages/Tonies-for-teachers. That is /pages/Tonies-for-teachers, where you can find lots more information about all the beautiful new products they are creating. From the classroom starter set to the school expansion pack to the 6-pack school bundle. Loads of fun and lots to learn with Tonies. But we can talk for hours about this, but we're not going to, because we're going to jump from screen time into audio time, and then talk a little bit about Tonies. And because you're a marketing director there, you've been working with them since 2020. For those people who do not know Tonies, could you give us a very quick pitch?
Sure. Tonies was started in Germany. It launched with the Toniebox in 2016. It was founded by a couple of dads who met on the board of a preschool together. One thing they noticed is their children's teacher was using a CD player to play songs and stories in the classroom, and they thought that's great and all, but CDs at this point are old technology. They scratch and they break, and most importantly, young kids can't operate them without an adult to supervise them. So they created a figure-based system, named it Tonies, and developed a Toniebox, which is a little 5-inch cube. It's padded so that it's really durable. A child can, toss it around, roll it around, how 3-year-olds can be, 4 or 5-year-olds can be. And you put a figurine called a Tony on top. That figure has an RFID chip inside as well as a magnet. And what it will do is it will connect to Wi-Fi. It will download content onto the box the first time it's placed on the Toniebox, and then it'll play a variety of songs and stories. So at this point, they launched in 2016, expanded very quickly to the United Kingdom, and then into the United States in 2020, which is when I came on board. And they've developed, hundreds of these figurines from all sorts of different partners, everything from Disney to Dr. Seuss, uh, all of our children's favorite storybook, TV, movie characters are becoming Tonies to play songs and stories, and it's great because it's all screen free. So there's no staring at a screen, there's no kids going into zombie mode. It's really just about audio and learning to listen and train your mind on
Yeah.
audio.
And what I like about it is that seemingly, as you said, it combines audio and play. Could you talk a little bit about the play element here? How do you and how do you see that further developing?
Yeah, it's a great question because, at this point, there are a lot of devices in the world. There's a lot of children's devices in the world. You can go to your Amazon device and say, Alexa, play me a story, and it'll probably play you a story. So we felt that it was necessary to include an element of tactile play. So the figurines are actually hand painted. So there's a little bit of a fun factor for the kids to actually have a tangible figurine that they can collect, but also it's the motion of putting it on the box. The navigation of the songs or the stories is actually done by whacking the side of the box. You actually have to hit the box, which is fun for kids. And it starts to teach kids the call and response of this is what happens when I do this. The volume is manipulated through pinching the little ears on top of the box. And so the audio is an extremely important element, but it's also the combination of the audio with the tactile play that helps further develop children's cognitive skills, their fine and gross motor skills, and even their social skills as they learn to play with other children.
That's amazing, and I think you've got a great ambassador there. You've got a former Star Trek actor who's kind of doing also storytelling with the Tony's device. Is that correct?
Yeah, so shortly
Mhm.
after I came to Tony's, I thought, who would be the best person to help us tell this story? And I had grown up watching LeVar Burton on Reading Rainbow, which for our American listeners are probably most familiar with. He was on that program for over 25 years. He has a love of storytelling and a love of reading. And so I basically cold called him up, reached his agent, and persuaded him to come on board and help us tell the Tony story.
Amazing, and I'm sure that was a journey in and of itself, and it grew further and further because it was a successful match. Am I correct?
I would say so.
Mhm.
I had the opportunity to meet him a couple of times. We actually did a school donation in Southern California earlier this year where we came out. We filmed a little short form documentary about it. And so it was great to meet him and to further the cause of promoting screen free storytelling.
Nice. Nice. I mean, this is great. I think I see a lot of things coming together with such an audio tool. The audible side, so no screen involved, the play and audio, and kind of finding the right balance between those two, and really looking at a child's development and how a child works with it. So yeah, I mean, I think that a lot of things come into play there. How do you or maybe the founders, how do they see this further evolving? Is it like, okay, more stories, we're going to bring in more stories and whatever, or do you see kind of another purpose for the Tony's box further down, let's say in 10 years or 5 years?
Yeah, well, there's so much possibility. We'll be launching more and more stories. There are hundreds, if not thousands, of stories to tell. Those can all become Tony figurines. We can also use the technology in new and different ways. And so we have what are called creative Tonys. Those are the ones that actually come blank. You can upload your own audio content up to 90 minutes per figure. And grandparents really love these because they can read a bedtime story or record a special message to their grandkids from their to their phone from anywhere in the world, and they can send it to the figurine. So that's kind of a different application of the technology. And then we can
Mhm.
also put the chips in different form factors. So we've actually just announced a partnership with Stife, which is a plush company. So we're now putting the chips into teddy bears, and so
Oh yeah.
you can enjoy stories with teddy bears instead of figurines.
Yeah.
Um, We have new features in development as well to further engage children and to make it interactive. So listening to a story is a somewhat passive experience, but we're working on ways to bring the child into a more active play experience through call and response. So that will be something that we'll be focusing on in the near future as well.
Yeah. I mean, what comes to mind with me is that it's not only children who could use such a tool. I recall my late grandmother, who at a certain point she lost her eyesight, but she loved to read. So at a certain point she was very into audiobooks. Now, of course, you have tools like Audible and kind of, as an application, but such a device, because it's so easy to operate, could also function very well for, senior people who might have less abilities to get to good audio content very quickly and use it as a device that they could use. It doesn't have to be like the Lion King or whatever. It could be more mature books as well, right?
Yes, absolutely. We hear that feedback, and it's not a primary focus for us, but we definitely have a strong application in assisted living centers and for elderly people who want to hear audio stories or just music. You can put any type of content onto a Creative Tony. So even if we don't have a figure for it, you can certainly add it on there and then have a tactile experience where you don't need to fumble around with the screen.
Okay. Yeah. Sorry, that's just me thinking aloud. Just me sitting
great.
in your chair. Just yeah. No, that's good. Thank you. And so, going to your podcast, your professional podcast, Tony Time. What is it about?
So one of the other programs that I instituted when it came to Tonies was called Tonies for Teachers, which is demonstrating the educational application of the Toniebox. So it can be placed into classrooms as part of different centers. We've actually developed 4 different centers: Independent Play Center, Reading Center, a Discovery Center, and a Mindfulness Center. And so we're teaching educators how this can be used in the classroom and having quite a bit of success there. So the Tony Time podcast will bring on guests to talk about how they're using Tonieboxes in the classroom. And as we've expanded, we have looked at other applications as well, including libraries. So we actually did a library integration in the state of Delaware. One of the state representatives was a fan of Tony's, reached out to me, said, I want to put Tonieboxes in all of the state's public libraries. So that was something that we did. Also children's museums, and really just the educational application of the Toniebox at home is a great use as well, just because it's an on-demand listening experience. So, taking some of our partnerships with National Geographic or others, it's really an anytime educational opportunity. So Tony Time, the podcast, goes into detail on how and where to use a Toniebox and the educational benefits of it.
That's great. And, there's so much to be done there, looking at the educational benefits, and also so much still to learn, right? It's really good to get feedback from teachers, classroom experts, and, people that work with children on how to apply the Toniebox. It's not that you've reached the final stages there. It feels like it's only the beginning, right? So there's still so much to discover and uncover there. And hopefully there's going to be a lot more than the centers, which is, of course, a very good basis to grow from. But that's sounds like an exciting journey. What is it that you're most proud of when it comes to Tony's in the time that you've been working there?
It's really combating screen time. With COVID, especially, kids are on screens for 4 to 5, 6 hours a day. And, let's face it, screens are a great babysitter. If you're working from home, or if you need a minute, it's easy to give a kid your smartphone. It's easy to give them a Netflix show. And I'm not saying that screens are terrible or bad and that we should cut them off completely. That's a personal choice that families can make. But I'm really proud that we're giving parents another option, a screen-free option, and giving children their first device that's kind of parent approved. And so to the extent that we can do that and give parents a toolkit for combating screen time, that's something I'm extremely proud of.
Yeah, I think you're right. We have the Toniebox as well, and it's a little bit of a sanctuary kind of, when our daughter listens to it, she's absorbed with it. She's focused, but she's still part of this world. Whereas with a screen, she almost zones out. It's like she's not in the room, right? And we have that too. We can be so absorbed in our smartphone, and sometimes you look up, it's like, oh, where was I? Kind of, it's less of that effect when you work with an audio tool like Tonies, and there's still absorption, but it's not your brain being hijacked. And still there's development, most definitely on an audible level. Plus, these are nice stories, right? So my daughter is very in love, like many other 3-year-olds in this world, with the Frozen sisters, Elsa and Anna, and having the Frozen figurine that sometimes just disappears because mom and dad just had enough of that, let it go. But it does make her happy, when she puts it on there and kind of, can listen to it. And as you say, not so intrusive and still very valuable for the childhood experience. This is great. Maybe kind of, as we wrap up, and thank you so much, Drew, for giving us your version of events when it comes to audio tools, podcasts, and what have you more. How do you see kind of the future of podcasting? Where do you see that land? There's, when I started this podcast, loads of people said, well, there's already so many. Which difference are you going to make? That wasn't at all kind of how I interpreted it. I was said more like, we have this community and I would like to talk to this community through this podcast. How do you see this evolving? Just your perspective on this.
Yeah, I think obviously podcasting has exploded over the last 6 or 8 years. I remember listening to a podcast called Startup, which was about a gentleman who I think had worked in media, and I think he told his wife that he wanted to quit his job and start a podcasting company, which became Gimlet Media. And at the time, back in 2014 or whenever, it was, kind of a crazy idea. How can you make it work, starting up a podcast company? And obviously the last 8 years have shown us that there's plenty of stories to tell. There's plenty of topics to talk about. I think it probably hit kind of a big peak in COVID because everybody was home and went out and bought a microphone and started a podcast. So it might subside a little bit from that peak, but I see it continuing to grow. And I see it as kind of a counterbalance to this highly visual, highly erratic world that we live in. People who enjoy podcasts, in my experience, tend to be the ones who have the higher focus, that can hold a conversation with someone else, that can train their mind on a long form piece of content. And I think there's always going to be a need for that. And for that reason, podcasting will continue to play a significant role in the world.
Long live podcasts. I couldn't agree more, Drew. I'm not going to add anything to this beautiful plea. Thank you very much for being our guest. My two very last questions that I ask to all my guests is, one is because you've immersed yourself in reading every morning. Is there a book you would like to recommend to our audience for people who want to venture out on a similar path as yourself? Is there one book that inspired?
The one that you mentioned, by the way, The Atomic Habits, is a great one. But since you took that one, I'm just going to give another plug for The Practice, which is the Seth Godin book that I mentioned, that just talks about the method of just chipping away day by day of getting to where you want to be, not through grandiose measures, but just through the daily, I won't call it a grind, but the daily practice. So I would highly recommend that book.
Nice, good call. The Practice. And then am I correct to assume that in answer to my next question, there's who would be your favorite podcast guest? Would that be Seth Godin then? Or would that be someone else?
Yeah, probably would. I mean, I met him once briefly and had a brief interchange with him. I think he's great. I guess I've got him on the top of my mind. So I'm going to take the easy road and say Seth Godin. Seth
Godin. Well, Mr. Godin, if you're listening, we are singing your praise here for your podcast and your book. So come on our podcast, or Drew's podcast for that matter, as our guest. Drew, thank you very much for being our first audio aficionado. I had a great time. I learned a lot about childhood, audio tools, early development, and really the future of podcasts. Thank you so much, Drew Vernon.
I appreciate you having me. Thanks for that, Aldo.
If you liked this episode of the Teach Pitch podcast, then it would mean the absolute world if you could share it with your friends and or give it a short review on your preferred podcast platform. The more you share your ideas about these interviews, the more people will find out about them. So do let us know what you think. we'd be very, very grateful.
Special thanks to Philip Anderson for our beautiful theme music. This podcast was produced and edited by Natalie Piles, project coordination by Inva Saini, and production assistance by Genta Metalia.